All right. So for the next 3 days, and for those of you some people have come back to academies in the past and we've asked them back, but this is very unusual. I hope you realize how unusual it is for any organization that's actually running. We are not a conference center, school, to actually invite you into our home for 3 full days. And it's one of those things, for an hour, 2 hours, you can fool almost anybody. 3 full days. And in fact, the schedule is built so that you will be able to interact not just with us, but one-on-one with employees at every different level. And what we found over the years is people will pull them aside and start grilling them. Is this real? Is this true? And so we even created sessions where you have lunches with them and setups. I want you to ask every skeptical question you have, but you will be part of our family moved in for 3 full days. And this is something that's very unusual because most people don't want to share their skeletons. The outside wrapping is usually a lot prettier than what's inside. We will show you both. We have no idea what will happen fully in the 3 days because we're running a business while all this is happening. And there's nobody hired that is literally hired just to run this. So employees are doing double duty everywhere, and they're here early, they're here late to make sure. But we hope you will stay with us for dinners, if you can, for the workouts and dinners. Everything is done with a very strategic purpose. Even the workout tonight, and if they mentioned, is done differently than the workout tomorrow to help your processing and thinking. And the discussions after dinner is usually where it gets most interesting. A lot of people call us pioneers, and pioneers can sound complimentary. But if anyone who's been a pioneer, if you look at their back, there's thousands of arrows on our backs. And so we have stories of everything we figured out remotely valuable. We have done it extremely wrong in the extreme other side. So I'll save a lot of those stories. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's nutrition, fitness, coaching, development, for dinner time discussion. So Megan and I will be here both days. And I think Greg and Tom in Boston as well. So please stay with us and through the process. But just really quick, for the next 3 days, I want you to challenge and suspend conventional norms. There is so much more we have in our heads that we operate, especially in the topic of teams and people and coaching and helping others, that we were trained, and it's so ingrained in us. Most of us don't even realize what is actually something that we're holding so fixated, like a stone column, in our brain, saying this is always true and never will move. And I want you to spend the 3 days because we're going to challenge a lot of it. And there's an individual we met by the name of Roger Martin. He's one of the top strategy experts in the country. And I love what he said. He said, creativity and innovation, it's making something that did not exist. Creativity and innovation is making something that did not exist. And a lot of people, when you think about data, all data is from the past. And if the future looked just like the past, data is fantastic to make data-driven decisions. People ask always, is that backed by research? Researchers have studied things in the past. The most cutting-edge researchers come and park themselves in our company to do the research and write the research of what's coming around the corner. We are in a huge transformation across the globe. And that transformation is a 100-year transformation. The industrial age was 1900 to 2000. With Y2K, there was a material change that occurred. We are now in the information age. And this age goes for 100 years. And despite the fact that the information age makes it sound like it should be the age of AI, data, and computers, it's actually not. It's actually the age of people. And so we'll go through a lot of this and why coaching matters and the split-second judgments and intuition of people matter. How we got here is sort of an interesting story. My mother is a pastor of a church. And my mother always said, this isn't exactly the word she used. I'm translating her Korean into, not exactly what she said, but she basically said, you teach what you're good at. You share what you're good at, not what you suck at. Very simple. What we learned that we found that worked with us, we started sharing with everybody we knew. Sort of like when you go and watch a great movie, right? Or you find a good restaurant, you tell people you like, loved ones, friends, immediately, oh my God, I saw this movie. Oh my God, you got to watch this special. Oh my God, you got to go to this restaurant. We did that. And Megan and I got so tired of repeating what we were saying, we ended up building culture tours. We trained every employee in every office to be able to repeat and tell the culture tours of all the things that we were doing that were working, but in particular, also sharing all the mistakes we made. Mistakes is another fancy word for experience, right? We did a lot of things wrong. And we started sharing kind of the is not list of don't do it this way. Here's what we learned. And then here are some of the new ways that we're trying. And as we did more and more of it, you'll see the cultural tour is a living tour. It's changing all the time. Then as the tours went on, people started asking, can you teach me what's on the wall there? Can you teach me how to do that? And we started to do it literally on the spot while giving tours. And that led to February 2014, we launched our first Leadership Academy. And this was something that started every Thursday, eventually went to 3 full days, once a month. It was so grueling. People started asking for 5-day versions, longer. And we said, we're running a business. We can't afford to be able to take our people out of commission to do these very often. And one of the things that we held dear was to keep it so that it's by invite only, despite tons of applications, but it was built to actually give us selection power. We wanted people who were in the arena. We dislike what we call armchair professors. Nothing wrong with academics, nothing wrong with researchers, but we like people who are in the arena dealing with the nuances of the challenges. What happens in theory, what happens in practice doesn't always match up. Oftentimes what happens in what you see in theory, to do it right, you have to do it backwards in practice, and that ends up being the most effective. These are some, if you watch Ready Player One, sort of ruin the movie a little bit, you got to go backwards to win. There's a lot of things we learned like that. So I'm going to walk you through kind of how we went from that to the entire culture tours led to leadership academies. We've had, I mean, thousands upon thousands of leaders we've trained. And in the process, not only did, and all pro bono, and the goal is never to charge for our leadership academies, but it's getting more selective in actually getting a seat in the academy. And what we've done, and we found also, is the diversity of people attending made a huge difference. So I want you to spend time getting to know each other. We found, I mean, amazing connections between people in education and people in the military. You know, people in the military feel you're always understaffed and not enough budgets. Wait till you meet people in public schools, right? And you will start to feel like, oh my God, what am I complaining about? People in public schools would talk about how they don't have the talent levels, you know, that, you know, the best talent goes to for-profit companies like finance and tech. Well, we met people in the military that came from nowhere backgrounds, and amazing, brilliant human beings with 2 PhDs, 3 master's degrees, and that's like a typical person. It's amazing what you will learn just from what you believe can't be done, you'll see done in other organizations, but also what we found that was brilliant is that I think you'll be inspired by each other, that these problems aren't just you. They're showing up everywhere. People challenges are very common. So we went through, ran the leadership academies. The next thing that happened with leadership academies is people kept asking, what technology do you use to do this, to do that? And all the questions came down to one simple thing: people talking to people. You know, in the industrial age, it kind of didn't matter. People communicating with rapid speed, learning how to function as a well-oiled team didn't matter because there was a command and control system. A few people on top wanted you to do something, follow instruction, and making sure everyone does it is what organizations designed to do really well. This is different now. There is no computer more powerful than the human brain. Creativity and innovation is done by human beings, not by computers, as of yet. Skynet might show up in 2100, but not yet. It's going to be 100 years of harnessing what is capable when teams of human beings work together. And so we had such an overwhelming request for help through academies, through mentorship, coaching, and just knowledge, and even like the technology we built. And we believe this should not be a business. The act of helping people talk to people better, sharing your true thoughts, not half truths, but full truths, right? We often share what's half true, not fully telling you everything I'm really thinking, for fear that I might look dumb, that you might be laughed at, might be incomplete. There's a lot of notions that we don't do, and we don't bring our full self. I mean, when you come to work, do you say, I don't know if I'm fully myself because I just kind of had a kerfuffle with my kid trying to leave the home, and the wife said something that kind of bothered me, and then do you bring the stuff? You leave it all home, right? You're supposed to come to work and be on fire and act like it won't affect your work. It affects your thinking. It might not affect your manual labor, but it will affect your mental labor. And it will absolutely show up through your subconscious in different ways. And what ended up happening for us was that we had so much demand for this information, for this technology, that without even knowing, unbeknownst to us, from 2015 to 2017, half the company resources got spent towards giving it away, sharing this knowledge. And our board and investors flipped out. We are not a nonprofit. Make that very clear. We have investors that come from all ranks, and two of them try to fire me as CEO. We had an uproar amongst them. And what was interesting for us was this. There was such a demand that kept growing, and history does not repeat, but it tends to rhyme. The last big change that occurred was in 1920. It showed up in work, and it showed up in schools. There's a long history. You can look in some of our older videos. That 20% mark is when old systems fail in a new century. We are less than 1 year away from 2020. And if you aren't seeing it in your own organization, what used to work does not work anymore. And that is something that's showing up because the old ways aren't working. It's not to say throw it all away, but I want you to keep mind of that. So we went through and we had 100 large companies who wanted our help making this change and said, look, I appreciate the social movement. I appreciate what you're doing, giving all this stuff for free, but I want an enterprise version and I want your help. And we had 100 companies who piloted our technology saying, I will pay you for this. This is critically important. We are dying in multiple ways. Help me with this. And that ranged from, the biggest of big companies, Fortune 500 companies, the CIA, the Air Force, the Navy. We went through a process a year and a half ago of interviewing 100 of them to say no to 99 to pick one that we will launch with first, where in the tech world, we call it beta. So we wanted a beta client where we would sign on, and there would be a paid beta client, but we would go and put this at an enterprise level, help their organization while upgrading the technology and everything we're doing. So that company we picked was the Navy. You're seeing a lot of Navy, you'll see a lot of Air Force. The Air Force offered matching contracts. We actually said no, and we have been buried for 6 months, literally visiting, more commands than you can imagine. They have 640,000 employees and 5,000 commands, helping in every way and nuance and finding every which way that something goes wrong in practice when you try to scale something. And we learned a ton. This is the first academy, I would say, we're coming out. If we're a submarine that went underground or underwater, we are coming up above the ice and murky waters and sharing how we systematized what we're doing with the Navy. And so it should be an interesting journey for you to see some of these things. But I want to take you through a couple things. One of the biggest lessons that's important is a lesson we got from a team at Harvard from biology. When you do anything tied to teams, human beings, animals, living organisms reject change. Anything new, when there is too much changing too fast, it will be rejected. They found that if you don't preserve 98% of the original DNA and change only 2%, most things will get rejected. Innovators, people who love new ideas. I'm sure many of you are here in this room and in Boston. You try way too many things too fast, right? When you come back and say, I went to this leadership academy and oh my God, I've got 12 things I want us to do immediately. And you look around and people walk away from you. It's almost like seeing a wet dog, right, come out of water. You don't want them shaking their water on you. You have to recognize Changing a human being is different than changing machines. You can change literally 98% of a machine, it's fine. With human beings, small changes done right is much more important. And of course, then the important part is, what is that 2%? That 2%, by the way, translates to an average individual for average organizations to approximately 1 hour per week or 4 hours a month. You can make a change, and ideally in the rituals of the organization, of no more than 1 hour a week, 4 hours a month. And if you can institute the right changes there, you will see dramatic differences. And what's important is this: any high-performing team, any high-performing organizations, you will find that these type of changes, they're usually called rituals, or they're called habits. Now, the difference between a ritual and habit is, a ritual, you have to push yourself to do it. But once it becomes part of you, part of your automatic, your default, it becomes a habit. It pulls you to do it. If you work out consistently, when you try not to, you will feel weird. You'll see that what was difficult to start to do is now hard to not do. It becomes part of your normal, part of your default. There's a lot of studies on how to build habits correctly and whatnot. What we found from the best in the world is this: it takes 3 to 6 months to build proper habits, where it pulls you to do it, where it is now part of your automatic, meaning I don't have to expend a significant amount of energy to do this. There's a white paper coming out from a team at, actually a PhD at Harvard, that was talking about what she observed studying us for 9 months. And she was saying there's a lot of things that are seemingly very difficult for people to do. Finding time to have conversations and feedback, right? You said something to me and I'd like to talk to you about it, is a very difficult thing to do. I have to find a time when you're ready, I'm ready, my words are ready, and all these things that happen make it that this mutually convenient interaction almost never occurs. And yet the highest performing organizations take things like this and they're managed at the organizational level. An organizational level management, as in setup, is what most people call culture. And it's hard to define because it's just baked into your normal. A culture is literally the rituals or the adopted habits of a team, of an organization. It's the same thing, but it's happening at a team level. And these things are done ever so subtly. And if you change more than 2%, you will see that it will not work. But when you get to the right 2%, it's pretty awesome what happens. In fact, the idea of rigor and discipline, which is what rituals tend to be, is the foundation of, is the launch pad for most great things. You want to be creative, you want to use your mental brain. If you don't have your foundation set, the chance of you succeeding is close to 0. And if you succeed, it's because of pure dumb luck. It's like playing roulette. However, when you get your foundation right, it will not guarantee success, but your chance of success will be much, much higher. Team Bibs, I call it brilliant in the basics, is that notion of rigor and discipline. I'm going to give you the punchline, and you're going to spend the 3 days building up to this. Tom and Greg will take you through more. But what we found, spending time over a decade with over 1,000 different organizations, and the practice we did and the sharing of knowledge, we ran these academies. I mean, I think at this point, over 3,000 leaders from different organizations with one rule: go try something that you learn. Just one thing, if anything. I don't care if you fail. But if you don't try anything, please never reach out to us again, ever. We do not want to hear from people who say, that was interesting, I don't try anything. And that means, by the way, when you go back on Monday, you have to plan to try something that week, ideally early and fast. Because if you don't, you'll see life will get the better of you and you won't try anything. But you know what's interesting about taking 3,000 leaders and doing that? A lot of people tried a lot of different things. And we found a lot of the challenges of kind of trying the wrong sequence, the wrong order, and order and sequence absolutely matters. And what we found, the punchline is this: the things that matter most fell into 2 buckets. One is information flow. Say it simply, people being able to talk to people. We found incredible information flow when we networked our computers. The power of radars and sensors and Internet of Things, because connected computers provided far better information to everyone. And now we all walk around with a supercomputer on our fingertips. I mean, I would hate to be a doctor in today's day and age. I would hate to be even a teacher, because people come in armed with so much information. Have you ever heard about this test? Have you heard about this? Well, have you heard about this research which counters your point? There's so much information. We have information overload in what Daniel Kahneman, a researcher, called System 2 data. It's logical, analytical thinking data. It's what he called slow thinking. Our logic and analytics, by the way, computers do that far better than we will ever do. And they're soon replacing human beings' ability to even play much of a role in looking at System 2 data. But System 1 is what he called fast thinking. It's our intuition. And research and intuition is very light, because it's very hard to know what is actually in your head. This researcher that recently came 9 months with us called it a psychological mirror, if you do this right with your team. Managing our own psychology is so hard because we can't see it. Other people around us can see it. And you can't work on anything you can't see. But our head, our intuition, our own psychology is so powerful. In fact, intuition is the sum of our experience. We are by nature pattern recognizers. I love this insight. Tom in Boston shared this as a study about music, why we all love music and certain genres of music. It's because we recognize the patterns in certain types of music. Whether you like hip hop or country, like there's a rhythm that occurs and you get a dopamine hit when that same pattern shows up. But the most sophisticated types of music, like classical, it's got you set up and you're expecting this dopamine hit. It doesn't come, and you're waiting. But at the very end, it gives this massive release, a dopamine hit that occurs because the pattern you're expecting shows up. We are wired in our brains, no matter what the situation. Every single instance, we're saying good thing, bad thing. It's red or green, milliseconds. But to understand the bullet points of why did I think that was good? Why did I think that was bad? Is something we don't spend a lot of time understanding. And they say in the research, because no one's been able to see inside people's brains, it's only done in the labs, intuition, even feedback. We had a Harvard team go and spend almost 8 years trying to study feedback, and they found virtually nothing existed. All of it is behind closed doors. So no one gets to see what's actually happening. So we had them come and spend 9 months parked in here, watching, studying. I mean, every interaction, it's the most comprehensive study and feedback. It's a 160-page document, which we just approved the final version after we read it, and it's coming out in a couple of weeks, so you'll be able to see it. But it's very cool. But what you'll find is this, what's happening in the human brain, it is so powerful. But the research does say this, it's right half the time, but it's wrong half the time. We all have mental models for almost any situation, anything, but half of them are right and half of them are broken. We remember the past oftentimes incorrectly. We have bad experiences and we say, in those bad experiences, when I did that, I survived, so I keep repeating that. And we don't challenge that when new information enters the equation, you often have to act differently. Well, right now you have 100 years of new information entering every organization. And the mental models range from, do not bring me a problem unless you have a solution. That is a very bad model. Most of the time now, the problem is a puzzle. We all see pieces of the puzzle, and you need to put the pieces on the table, and the solution sometimes shows up in pieces as well. So if you don't have speed and teams of people putting whatever their intuition is seeing on the table fast and then acting fast, you move as slow as an elephant. It is slow and steady, and when the world moves slow, that was a brilliant organizational design. But why you need to move differently like a cheetah is this. The notion of agile, not waterfall. The notion of iterating quickly, it's because you will fall behind. And that speed is showing up everywhere. And so this notion of information flow, the most powerful computer that still exists is the human brain. But just like computers, which got much more powerful when we network them, networking our collective intuition, that is the power of a team. That is the most important thing. And if you watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, there's 3 wild cards. If you don't know the answer, there's one wild card that was consistently the most valuable. Poll the crowd. You'll see they never were 100% right, but the majority is almost always right. That was the most powerful card, no matter what the question was. And you will see in an organization, understanding the collective intuition of your team, not just the senior people, not just the junior people, but the collective intuition. That data is incredibly powerful. So that then leads to decision-making, which is coaching. And coaching is making judgment calls. Decision-making is human beings making judgment calls. The collective judgment-making of an organization, right, can be great, can be poor. And what you find is this: we are all compensated and evaluated in individual performance. But what's fascinating is anybody from the outside judges you as a team, as an organization. I'll talk about Boeing and the planes they're crashing. Yes, every individual, whose fault was it? Does it really matter? Boeing as an enterprise is feeling the pain. When the Navy had ships crashing, did it matter who really did it? Does it matter the one individual, whether it's the junior officer, the senior, the Navy took the hit. Consulting firms like EY, yes, the individual performance, individual promotions, individual salaries and bonuses, yet the clients judge them on the team. Clients judge them on how EY is doing. And so the notion of everything moving to team sports means the collective decision-making power of the team. That means a lot of people all making decisions almost like a hive seamlessly is something that doesn't just come just because I have to do it. And like any skill, any sport, it needs to be practiced, it needs to be trained, and those with experience, said another way, those who made a lot of mistakes, they need to help coach those who have made less. And that's where the hierarchy and the scaling will start to matter. So going into this really quick, what's interesting about some of the challenges out there, I'm going to bring you back because Tom in our Boston office spent time with this guy named Barry Gentz. Barry Gentz was a professor at Harvard. And he was brought in 30 years ago on a very interesting project. I don't know if you've heard of the 3 Mile Island. It was the only nuclear meltdown that happened in the US. In 1979. Was that 40 years ago? 40 years ago. 40 years ago, right? The only nuclear meltdown. And Barry Gentz was called in to study what the hell happened. What went wrong? And you know what they found? This is 40 years ago. The team didn't talk to each other. The communication, and literally, I think it was as small as 5 people. Their inability to openly, with speed, communicate and talk to each other led to the only nuclear meltdown in US history. So Boeing, right? You know how good technology is now between catching errors and bugs and everything? Boeing had 2 planes recently crash, right? They coded something wrong in the systems. Nobody caught it. And both planes, crashing, killing 340 something people. Our CTO, John Hilliard, said this to us, wrote an email just a couple days ago saying, I think the complexity of systems is orders of magnitude more sophisticated than it's ever been. The idea that the 20th century model of working is not set up to handle this really resonated with me. I can definitely see it with Boeing. They're set up so that there are different teams and they integrate everything and test it. That used to work in the 20th century, this notion of assembly line. Everyone does their parts and it just kind of fits together. When things were less complicated and moved slower. Now you've got competition and the need for speed. At Boeing, you have all these teams that work together to make something, but it seems like they didn't talk to each other. Because in hindsight, their mistake is very clear and very bad. Can't get much worse than what they did. How does organizational judgment fail so spectacularly? Talk about organizational judgment. the collective decision making, the judgment call made after the first one, for the second one to occur within weeks. How does that happen? How did the Navy have 5 ships? How does this happen? And you looked, the Navy did studies, Boeing did studies, it's coming out. People just didn't speak up. Now, someone saw something, but you know that notion of they saw a piece of the puzzle. But don't bring me a problem without having the full solution. So nobody brought the piece of the puzzle to the table. And everyone held on. And you know, we have a term in the company, we call it NQR, not quite right. You ever see poker games, right? And someone does something, you're like, that's an NQR. You ever go to, you know, talk to someone and you're like, that's an NQR. Putting an NQR on the table, that's your intuition telling you something isn't right. The collective NQRs produce usually a much greater view into what the puzzle looks like. And it's amazing when you can see the problem, you can fix it pretty quick. But this has to happen with speed. So when you look at what is happening at work, this transition, this transformation, work used to look like this in the left. Manual labor, doing work, and it was a team sport. It was organized, but it was organized with command and control, and the top skill that they were trained, as in all employees, was following instruction. Compliance and uniformity was the most important 2 traits. But work is changing. It's now not manual labor, mental labor. It's thinking. And what's interesting about thinking versus doing is that the same things don't apply. You hear a lot now about the long work hours and people are more productive in shorter hours. And China, you know, is getting a lot of bad press about 996, working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. In fact, they have a website called 996.icu, right? Intensive care unit. And yet companies are saying, admittedly, how do I compete against a company that has employees as many as 100,000 people working 996? You can beat people when you work smarter. Now, this is not to take away from the notion of intensity, but there is a difference of mental intensity versus manual intensity. We spent a lot of time, you know, with different parts of the military. We just went to see the Navy SEALs, and they have a ton of work on physical toughness. My God, their physical toughness programs are some of the best I've ever seen. So we had them spend the full day walking us through the mental toughness programs. It was very underwhelming. Although they are some of the most mentally tough, this is a field that is so new. Most people don't understand that when you're not mentally tough, you know, Angela Duckworth and others call it grit, resilience. It is the bedrock, the foundation to launch into good thinking, to be creative, and to be innovative. But when you're not mentally tough, you give up too soon, and you can't take the challenge of confusing information and stressful problems and break through and stick with it. You'll see that your chance of winning is close to 0. Drivers of success in the industrial age: capital, technology, and headcount. Headcount, by the way, is a term that came from the industrial age. Organizations and more people were more powerful. I mean, you just can't go up against the military that has more people. 17 million people in the military at its peak. It's 2 million right now, 2 point something. And you'll see most battles are fought now with one individual sitting in some room with a drone. It's fascinating the differences that are occurring now. Companies that literally are worth billions of dollars, they needed at least 10,000 employees, if not 50,000, 100,000 to have that kind of valuation. Now companies like WhatsApp that was built with 50 employees, and when you drill in, they say we didn't need more than 3 to 6. Valued at $20 billion. The difference in headcount. This was an entire world, by the way, where more was better. Those with more money, those with more gadgets and more, you know, toys and technology, those with more headcount were the most powerful. So the question is, what is the driver of success when you move from manual labor to mental labor? High-performing teams and having a lot more of them and less of the low-performing teams. Because every organization has both. And the notion that they tend to be smaller in size, more agile. A team, by definition, the smallest unit is 2 people. And one of the things you'll see with Mega and I, if you ever heard this notion of fishes and monkeys, is Albert Einstein who created this, I think, or is credited with this quote where it's fascinating what happens when you look at fishes and monkeys. If you judge a fish by how well it climbs a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's incompetent, that it's stupid. Most businesses in the industrial age ran like triathlons, but without being judged in the way that it moved here. So sorry, take that back. Most businesses are now running like triathlons. Triathlons work like this. There's 3 sports in there. You have to run, you have to swim, and you have to bike. I don't know what order it is, but there's 3 things. The longest parts of the race actually are running and biking. The shortest part of the race is swimming in time and distance. So by sheer quantity, by sheer volume, it seems like the most important part is the running part. So if you have a team, right? Megan's our fish, she swims better than I do. I do the land sports better. Whose job is more important? Volume of speaking, volume of, time even competing. It looks like time on land has got to be the most important. Yet if you know anything about triathlons, the most important element of triathlons is the swimming. The difference between winning and losing always shows up in how well they perform in swimming. They say to succeed as a leader, as an individual, the higher up you go as a CEO, you make close to 100 decisions a day. And to stay in your role, you need to be an A CEO. You don't need the plus, but A. And A is 95 right calls consistently every day. And they say if you become a B CEO or a B leader, that's 85, right? Consistently. You should be fired. The standard is that high. I found I could consistently be a B CEO on my own. And yes, I got 85 correct. But the most important 10 is what Megan brought. And that allowed us to perform at a whole different level. So going into details, I'm going to walk you through some quick stories. It's interesting. By the way, if you're freaked out about the calendar and the schedule, because I know the military folks tend to be very I want you to see the entire schedule as directional, right? It is directional, and our team, I'm being dead serious, we iterate in real time. They will make changes through the course of this academy based on what you do, based on what is working and what is not. So don't flip out about the calendar and the schedule, because it is built to be directional. So versus precise, right? Last 10 years, we had one of the most interesting journeys, 10, almost 12 years, which is when you do something as a social movement, as pro bono, there's an incredible power you have. We did not go into organizations like the CIA or working, with the Marines or going to whoever it might be with any hidden agenda, no interest in charging, no interest in taking longer. I mean, we were so efficient that we had no qualms telling the head of the CIA, honestly, if this is a waste of your time, I want to be out of here right now. And it let us cut through all kinds of stuff rapidly. And in the process, we got to see the insides of over 1,000 different organizations at a global level, hearing what's really happening, because what you read about usually isn't the truth. That's the truth after the PR team went and wrapped it around and polished it and perfumed it. And then, wow, that's a bite-sized nugget to take away. You can now share it with the mass. We got to see the nuances, the complexities of what was happening, the inner dynamics. And what we learned and what we got was tremendous as we were giving this stuff away. There's a notion that they say when A teaches B, A gets smarter. So when A teaches B, A gets smarter. And we had the privilege of so much of this. The researchers now see us as the top place to come visit, to do the next book, to do the next research. So these are 10 examples of some of the places we took lessons from, whether it's this guy, Jim Fadigan, who's one of the top neuroscientists in the country. He invented the Sesame Street characters. So, children are scared of monsters but love cookies. Cookie Monster, right? So there's a lot of things he did, and he did some fascinating work that got 20,000 kids to jump a full grade in public schools in Florida, and just broke through, despite the curriculum that's set in schools today and all the stringent codes coming from the Department of Education. He found a way to beat the system. but training them differently, to Josh Waitzkin, world chess champion who became world martial artist. We'll tell you a bit more about him. I think Shared Living Collaborative is a group that's literally curing autism through farms and building into their environment and set up. And the team, I think in Boston, has some of their leaders here training with us. Peter Gorman, fascinating guy. The test you guys did on the Optogate, I think you guys did the walking test. Oh, they didn't do it? Okay, well, you do it tomorrow then, Paul, or not, part of the agility. But he, so I'll tell you more about him. Fascinating stuff he's done, self-made billionaire. He invented the heart rate monitor. So, when you look at treadmills and machines, he invented that technology, and he gets 10% of what Polar Tech sells globally for 20 years. His royalty checks were $2 to $4 million a week. So if you do the math, this guy made quite a bit of money on that, but built several other businesses after that. Private equity firm, NEA is one of the top firms in the world. Charter schools, we learned more from charter schools and preschools than any other group in education. They were less bound by some of the rules and tried the most cutting edge stuff. And then preschools, I think simply from the pressure, these executive moms who decided to leave the workplace and take the knowledge of managing 5, 10, 50,000 people to manage one. And then use your supercomputer at home with their research and brain thinking, pour it into preschool. I feel for the heads of preschool. They are challenged with a firepower of mental fight that is beyond, but it forced them to innovate and try things in ways that other groups weren't forced to as much. And so we learned more working closely there, did a ton of work helping the CIA and still do. Marines did interesting stuff, Fortune 500 companies that range from Zappos and all the others out there. And so no one got it all, but there are pieces of things they were doing. So let me just share 3 quick stories that'll be interesting. So this is the machine, this blue strip on the bottom here. But Peter Gorman created this machine, so after the Polar-Tech heart rate monitor, where it's basically taking 2 technologies. It's the lens of the Hubble telescope combined with lasers from ski racing. But rather than looking a billion light years away, it watches the human body and when it's walking, what happens, right? Watching your gait. How balanced, how imbalanced, how difficult is it for you to walk in a balanced fashion? Think about when you're a baby, you don't have balance, you crawl, you start to get balance, and then when you get old and eventually you die, you lose balance. And balance tends to be the first fall, is usually the beginning of the end. Now, what he discovered and learned has been used mostly in professional sports as well as medicine, but we're starting to find applications in other ways. But it's interesting. We spent a lot of time with this guy. 6 months he spent studying how we can connect the body to the mind and other connections. And it's some cool stuff that Megan actually had the insight, which is the #1 fight we all tend to have as couples. You walk too fast, you walk too slow, is actually not a physical, challenge. It's a mental and emotional choice, right? I claim my wife walks so slow, it kills me, but it doesn't really. And she says, I walk so fast, I can't keep up with this Olympic speed. It's not Olympic speed. You'll see that it is actually a choice we're making, but we have in our head that it's not a choice. It's just, so he created this machine and did some fascinating things. He found that, for example, I'll give you 2 quick stories. One is most Olympic athletes used to go to their destination 3 days before they have to compete. So if they go to Beijing, they would go 3 days before. You're training 4 years, a lot of training, right? And the difference between medaling and not, receiving gold or not, is fractions of seconds. So they obligated all the US Olympic athletes before they went to their destination country, so before they got on the plane. And they started obligating them every day. And they found that it took 5 days before they got to their normal balance they had before they boarded the plane. The vibrations on the plane threw off their balance enough that they were off balance when they went 3 days prior. So all US Olympic athletes now go 1 week in advance because of this. So there's some cool, we've had the privilege of meeting the coolest of people doing amazing things. But the more crazy story is this. Peter Gorman, in 2 separate instances, met 2 different people for different reasons, were paralyzed neck down. One was a football injury. The other one was a metal plate in the brain that rusted and then paralyzed both people for different reasons, neck down. They spent 6 years in rehab, in the best of rehab in the country, and were told, you will never walk again. Total strangers. So Peter Gorman, we call him Doc. He lives in Mahopac, New York. And he literally met these people totally by accident, said, come to my office. Both individuals, in 90 days, he got them walking again. And one of them is now running a marathon. So you meet this and you're thinking, this guy is Jesus, right? Or Muhammad, or whoever you would believe in. It's miracle work. It's magic. We've had the privilege of meeting so many people. The question, especially as the monkey, the more arrogant one, I ask, overly confident, right? What's the trick? How'd you do this? And we drill in. How'd you do this? And what happens is this. He had such a simple statement to share that people are wired to do the right thing. We are wired to actually self-correct. We are vehicles, vessels that self-correct, do the right thing. But we often don't know what right looks like. And so we end up doing the wrong thing. If you hurt your right foot, we tend to limp on the left and go like this. And yet the very thing that is the right thing to do is put pressure on your right foot. And you have to fight through that pain because that is the only way you will heal properly. But because it's so counterintuitive, we tend not to do it. And what he called feedback was this screen up here. He built this machine which in real time shows the user what is the right way to walk, the right balance. And in fact, the people were paralyzed. They needed two grown men to move their feet at the slowest speed the treadmill will go. And the person would watch what was balance and what was imbalance in real time. Did this every day for 90 days, and they started to walk. That's pretty cool. We found the same thing in human beings. We don't know what's going on in our head. We don't know about half of our broken mental models. And yet the people around us do. The people around us are our psychological mirrors. And if you could find a way to empower them to tell you what they're seeing in real time and telling you, you know what, that, you know, Torrance, that was an NQR, you know, well, why'd you do that? Like, if people around you, your teammates, actually told you the truth, despite the fear of, I might piss you off, so you might hate me for the future, you might retaliate and attack me back, you put all those things aside and we're able to tell each other what they're seeing. Despite the piece of the puzzle of the problem it is, the collective intuition gets teams to perform really, really well. And that power of real-time feedback gets most teams, most individuals within teams to do the right thing. Yet that is a very difficult thing to do in practice. It makes sense in theory, right? And in fact, what we found in CIA, we found even in every aspect of the military is on mission, oh my God, are they good, right? When they go on mission, their ability, that was dumb, don't do that. I mean, there's no filter. They use words like stupid. They use words like dumb. They call out whatever it is. In fact, I love Coach Mackey says, you know, when a coach yells at you, it's because it's faster, it's more efficient. When the coach stops yelling at you is when you should realize you're being passed up. You're not worth their time to tell you what they really think. Because no matter what any play, good or bad, the coach has an opinion. And you want to hear what that is. The same thing occurs. All your teammates, all people in the organization, they have opinions. You want to hear what that is. But when they stop sharing it, in research, it's what they call organizational silence. The greatest form of hostility we face in all organizations and all our relationships is the hostility of silence. Now, we'll take you through more of that, but when you are able to break through that, it's amazing what you can do. And right is a very difficult thing to do, by the way. Very, very difficult. There was an insight we got from schools where they said kids, when they're young, first start asking the question, why? Right? Why do I have to go to bed? Why do I have to eat? Why do I have to even eat vegetables? You know, I don't like it. Why? Next thing you know, they go into fair, right? It's not fair. You get to stay up and I don't. It's not fair, right? You get to go out, you know, it's not fair, right? Before you know it, you move into young adulthood or teenage years, right? And it's about being happy. Everything is about happy. That's my North Star. I do whatever makes me happy. But only once you become a parent, as in have responsibility for a life of another, do you focus on what is the right thing to do. And the right thing oftentimes in the short run is not fair and does not make people happy. But that right thing is a very difficult thing to navigate. And you'll only know later. I think in some of the coaching surveys, some of you said that you guys believe you're great coaches. It's not for you to judge. I think you know that. It's the mentee, it's the student. Over time, if they don't need you anymore, you were a successful coach. But if they have to keep coming back to you, what next? Well, after that, what next? And you keep seeing them repeating their errors, right? At the root levels. You might say they were a bad student and bad mentee, but usually it's bad coaches multiplied by bad mentees that exist in most organizations. So this is very hard, but it's much easier collectively, kind of like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. All right, so Josh Waitzkin, I won't go all the details, but the short end is this. I've been told I'm going too long here. So you as you, the idea of a psychological mirror, world chess champion, you know, he's same age as me, but he's in New York, spent a lot of time with this guy. And it's fascinating how did he beat his players, then became martial arts champion. We'll give us a copy of his book. It's really cool stuff. But basically the short end is this. His point was this: the same you shows up everywhere, except most people are playing poker. Meaning when you go to work, right? When you go to most places, you're not fully yourself. You're the version of yourself sitting at the poker table and everyone else is bluffing, and so am I. And so when I act like, yeah, I got good cards, I know what we're talking about. Do you really? Or when you ask the question, is it really to buy time, or is it like, what's the truth? What's the truth of what's actually happening? And what he found was that the truth of people showed up everywhere they went. So the way he beat his opponents was actually taking a little black book and following them around. And one of the top traits that people lack is patience. In sports, patience. Chess is a game of patience. Even martial arts takes patience. And he saw impatience show up in buffet lines, and people were impatient, tapping their foot. He saw at the elevator how many times they pressed the button, and he would give them a patience score, and this is how he beat his opponents. The same you will show up everywhere. Often disguised, though, at the table when playing poker. And we're all playing poker a lot, but you can't play poker all the time. So there's some interesting insights there. This one's kind of cool with the CIA. I don't know if you know what this is, but this is where Osama bin Laden was. How does the most powerful country in the world not find this guy? I mean, you know how much bribes and everything and satellites. You ever watch 24? It takes no more than like one episode. They find everyone. Literally, how does the CIA not find this person? And it's crazy. I mean, this is the most powerful country in the world with all the technology. We spent time with the guy who built the whole cybersecurity unit of this. And the woman who actually drove the research team, the analyst team to find them, share the most interesting story with us. This notion of biases and blind spots. Blind spots, by definition, we cannot see. But somebody else is not like me. This is the whole fish monkeys working together as a team. Diversity isn't about race, gender, or age. It's about diversity of thinking that's important. The default thoughts, default thinking, when you put teams together, it's crazy how fast system one can go. They sought out the original team that found the Titanic. In fact, most of them had died, so they found whoever was left, and they interviewed them on how they find this. Same problem in the world. They couldn't find this giant ship that crashed. And what they found was the underlying assumption was the ship broke in two, and everyone was looking for two giant pieces. Somebody on the team said, what happens if the assumption is incorrect? Maybe it broke into thousands of little pieces. They found the Titanic almost immediately after. After they got help from this team, they captured Osama bin Laden immediately after. Very cool stuff, right? This sheet, I think we sent you ahead. I'm sure all of you read all the pre-reads, right? Of course. Well, this is slightly updated, so I think they'll give you copies of this. But all of this, what we learned from spending time with thousands of organizations, the signals of low-performing teams and what shows up to the signals of high-performing teams. And the most important, it's kind of like the top 10 list. The most important at the bottom is this. So first of all, when people say, you know, trust is so important, right? High-performing teams have trust, right? You must trust your people, this and that. That's kind of like love. You must love, right? You must be passionate. These are things that you can't go direct at. You have to go indirectly, and the byproduct of doing the right things creates trust, also creates teams of high expectations within each other. What we found was this. rules and an over-reliance on rules creates what we call renters. You ever see a renter of a house versus an owner of a house? First question, what can I not do? And what are the minimum things I have to do? Babysitter versus a parent, right? What's the rules, right? Versus like, it's situational, it all depends. And you have to think about short and long-term and all that stuff. They're like, well, I want to know exactly what I can do and can't do, right? Like, what's the minimum I must do? And then, good job. Versus the idea of setup, this notion of organizational, managing it at the organizational level is around setup. This deliberate rituals that create owners. Ram Shriram is one of our investors. He was early investor in Amazon. Actually, he sold the company for $1 billion to Amazon, sat on Jeff Bezos's board for the growth years of Amazon, and then became the first angel investor in Google and has been on their board since. And his single largest investment to date is actually in our company. And we brought him on board simply to pick his brain on everything the Silicon Valley and West Coast companies do well. But there's something simple that he had said early on that was very important. He said there's a lot of things like innovation, like creativity, including trust, that you cannot dictate or mandate. You can't make rules on this stuff. You have to set it up. If you set it up in the environment and you set it up correct, these are the byproducts that will show up. So this parenting and leading coaching people is very similar. There's a recent New York Times article talking about in the 20th century, rule following was one of the most important skills. Parents were in total control, but in the 21st century, dictating no longer works. If you think it still works, just as you don't have children or you don't have anyone you're managing that is probably in the next generation, it doesn't work. And yet you don't throw it all away either. Remember, 98% must stay. And so I think we sent you something of kind of this old org is defined like an elephant. This was the model that worked brilliantly well in a time where things were slower and humans were just a piece of the machine. More headcount, better. And slow and steady was what it did. Discipline. But they say discipline, slow and steady, can oftentimes be the worst thing for innovation. There's a sense of chaos and speed. The agility of a cheetah is very important. And you see it's a pyramid because everyone must be coaching everyone, but not one-to-one in a scalable fashion. Most of us are only familiar with coaching on a one-to-one basis, and it doesn't scale. And in fact, you know who got the coaching? This group on top, this top 2%. There's not enough great coaches. And there's no way. And so then people try, I'll do the 5-minute coaching. I'll do the coaching, with everyone, lecture everyone, give you some basic, tools and principles, and you try to run with that. It doesn't work. So then they go into like peer-to-peer coaching. Well, everyone coach each other. It's like the blind leading the blind. Now, yes, when you have peers on top coach each other, it might feel a little bit better, but it's not coaching. It's simply, oh my God, I don't feel so alone is all it is. You're just having therapy with each other. So yes, those are important things. But one of the most important elements of coaching everyone in an organization is you need models that scale, meaning it can't go 1-to-1. It must at least go 1-to-2, if not 1-to-4, 1-to-8, something that literally can pyramid down. That's what you're going to experience for the next 3 days. We call them situational workshops. And the origins of this is fascinating because it started with all the methodologies of weekly management meetings, which we all do. Checkpoint meetings, the more I inspect them, the more they tend to do exactly what I want. Yes, you're going to get exactly what you want, but nothing more. In fact, it'd be a lot faster if you did it yourself, though. It's what they call micromanagement. And what they say when you micromanage, 2 people aren't doing their jobs. The notion of how we even stumbled upon this over a decade ago was saying, they're not doing what I want. So we literally said, why don't I help them do what they want, but better? People who have experience going around the sun a few more times, they might not have the right answers, but they can give perspective and information, possible strategies and ways that they are blind to because it's in their blind spot, and it opens up the wealth of options and choices. It's still up to them to choose. And that's what you're going to see practiced, observe, as well as try yourself. Ben Horowitz is well known, runs one of the top venture capital firms. Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz has created Netscape. So all the initial tools to browse the internet. And this is in his book that it was simple, but he said, we take care of the people, the products, and the profits in that order. Taking care of people is the most difficult of the three by far. And if you don't do it, the other two won't matter. By far, the most difficult skill that I learned as CEO was the ability to manage my own psychology. Organizational design, process design, metrics, hiring, firing were all relatively straightforward skills to master compared to keeping my mind in check. I thought I was tough going into it. I wasn't tough. I was soft. I'm sure some of you are coming in here believing you're just good at this, right? I mean, you have been through a lot. I mean, you are tough on this. I will tell you, we practice this arguably more than any other organization, getting the help of the best in the world, and we still stink at this. It is that hard. So I hope we can share, despite being so bad, some knowledge and things. But this is the punchline of what we found in all the organizations that performed well. High versus low performing teams. Top performing teams informated well, low performing teams, a lot of org silence, which then turned into something worse. It's what Megan coined years ago called LHF, lying, hiding, faking. Half-truths, holding back, playing poker. You know what's far worse than pure silence? Misdirection. Yeah, I got it. Really? I'll totally take care of it. I'll make the deadline. That's far worse than the truth. If they said nothing, you know you're probably not going to get it. The fact that they tell you they're going to do it for you makes it worse. When they're confused, they're lying to you saying, I'm not confused. They turn around, go to their buddy. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. What did they say? I have no idea what they're even talking about. What was that meeting about? The misdirection is far worse, and it happens everywhere. Information flow leads to decision making. The problem with coaching, and oftentimes what happens to judgment calls, is when you get bad information, right? Do you ever coach someone on something and you're like, well, yeah, based on the information you gave me, that was the right answer, but they didn't give you all the information. So you're like, well, you left that out. I would have given you different advice or different guidance. These two are closely related, but you can improve everyone's judgment call to act faster, move with speed. But if you don't fix the information flow at the root level, you'll see the rest of it won't matter. The other thing you'll find is this in coaching. The most common thing that will show up over time in coaching, that it didn't work. It didn't work, and you might be right. You ever meet a nutritionist or a doctor? They're usually always right. But you know what they'll do? Blame the patient. If you follow the 30 tips I had for nutrition, you would be healthier. The 30 things that you had to uproot your entire life and change at least half of what you're doing, if not 98%, right? But they're frustrated that the patient, the client, won't follow all the instruction. And yet, what you'll find is this: what you need help getting people to change. When it comes to psychology and what's happening, it is very difficult to change someone's broken mental models. You need the help of everybody else. And this is where feedback will come in. That becomes critical. This is for another academy. Feedback is what we call the cavalry. Do you know how much more people listen to the mass, the peers? This next generation is so skeptical of authority figures. Just because an authority figure says it, they reject it, right? Just because and it's amazing. You'll be friends with people, you get promoted. Once you get promoted, now you're an idiot, right? They will reject what you say simply because you're an authority figure. But when what you're saying as an authority figure matches what the crowd is saying as peers, oh my God, do they change fast? It's painful, but do they change fast? People starting at around 4 to 5 years old, even kids, start to care more about what their peers say than the authority figures. And so you need the backup of the cavalry to match up with the coaching, and that is ultimately the fastest way to help people see what is happening in their own head. This is just going back to the notion that, and you'll see the willpower-driven things. Write it down, promise yourself, have a commitment buddy. It doesn't work. For most of us, it doesn't. Because the bulk of what happens in us is what happens in our automatic. We actually run more like machines, our habits, the rituals that we end up adopting and being part of us. Baking it into your automatic is the best way to upgrade human beings. And this, by the way, this red zone can be upgraded continuously, but only at a rate of 2% at a time.